A friend of mine brought her husband-to-be to introduce to my dad and, let him know of their intentions to get married. When he met them, he asked a simple question. He asked them, why did you choose to get married? So why did both of them choose to marry each other? And the man answered and he said, I chose to marry her because I love her. My father smiled. And then he asked my friend and he said, why did you choose to marry him? And she went on and spoke so passionately about everything he'd done for her and all that he had contributed in her life. And my father paused and he looked at her and he asked her again, why did you choose to marry him? At this point, I think my friend knew. And at that point, something I didn't know. And she looked at her husband and she smiled and she said, amongst every wonderful thing he's done for me and all the great things he's done for me, I chose to marry him because I love him. Hello, everyone. It's Anari Samjaja, also known as ASJ, and welcome to Mindfulness with ASJ. Today, we'll be discussing free will as a gift of love. I'll explain further. So based on the story, I shared in the beginning, a lot of people's idea or motivation for love is because of the sacrifices or the gifts that the other person has made. And I've also realized that people do things or make sacrifices with the hopes that they can get people to love them. And that's where we're coming up with this theory of my investment. As great as sacrifice and acts of service and gifts are fantastic expressions of love, we also need to look at the power of those gifts, those sacrifices, those acts of service being given unconditionally. And the reason why these things should be given unconditionally is so that we can allow people express their freedom to choose to love you regardless of those things. So when you do not place an expectation on your sacrifices and you're doing it unconditionally, purely out of love, you give the person the freedom to love you without feeling obligated to, not because they have to, but because they want to. If you notice, there's a common narrative among human beings with this act of sacrifice and expectations, right? We hear people when there's conflicts in whatever relationship they're in, or after all I've done for you, after everything that I did for you. And the question is that the people that received these gifts, these sacrifices, when they chose to rebel or turn around, were these people actually wicked people? Or did society put them in a position where they have to just act a certain way because of the sacrifices? And then when you can't force them too much, their true self shows. And so it makes me question, as much as we always look at it from the point of view of the person who made the sacrifices, having those subtle and unspoken expectations of the person they were making the sacrifices for, do we actually look at the perspective of the person receiving the sacrifices? Do they feel manipulated into certain actions that are expected of them? Do they feel indebted to someone to do certain things that they wouldn't ordinarily do? And if that is the case, wouldn't that be a living example of somebody living in some form of bondage, even if the facilitation of that bondage is something positive? And so I know we come back to the next question then. If you're going to sacrifice for someone, or if you're going to give these gifts of love, should you now have no expectation? Absolutely not. I don't believe you should just walk around life having no expectations. And I'm sure that when people make sacrifices of love, they have intentions and they have things that they want from this person that they've made the sacrifices for. I think, again, that it doesn't make you a good person to do something and say, oh no, I'm just doing it because of it, when you know in your heart that there are certain expectations you want. I believe that when you're making sacrifices or you're doing things for people and you have expectations of them, it is only right that you let them know what those expectations are. It's only right to let them know what you desire from them. And if those sacrifices are unconditional, then whatever they decide to do or whatever they choose to do after the sacrifices have been made should not be too much of a bother to you. I like to say that expectations vary depending on 3 critical points: who you're expecting from, what you're expecting, and what values are attached to your expectations. First, with who you're expecting from. A mother that is sacrificing or doing things for her child in the moment does not expect anything from the child. We do things for the old and the vulnerable around us, not because we even expect a thank you, but we do it unconditionally. So even as twisted as human beings can be, we have that fundamental knowledge of being able to sacrifice completely and unconditionally for those that are vulnerable in our society. When we look at the perspective of a family unit, we see this love and sacrifice that comes very natural from parents to children to siblings. And even as much of it as a thank you, would like to hear the thank you, but it doesn't stop us from loving them and still going out of our way to do things for them, even if we don't get a thank you. That's a who issue. However, when it comes to our spouses, when it comes to our friends, we choose now to watch out for certain expectations. So expectations vary depending on who. What are you expecting? Yes, there are basic fundamental expectations, right? You would expect that, again, if you open the door for a stranger to walk in, you would expect that they say thank you. However, if they don't, you don't go and pull them back in the hair and then tell them to open the door themselves. You let it go and it doesn't bother you. That, again, is a who, and that, again, a what. The value of the expectation is reasonable, but at the end of the day, we don't hold ourselves or hold the other person too accountable to meet those expectations. Again, we expect love from our partners. We expect in commitment from our partners. And I want to just say partners, but I'll say, to be more concrete or to be more specific, I would say spouses, right? A wife expects commitment from her husband. A husband expects commitment from his wife. People don't go into a marriage with the idea of, oh, we're going to do this for 2 days and we'll come out of it. You go into a marriage believing that you're going to do that for life. You know, if those expectations are met, you thank God. If they are not met, you do feel a disappointment. You do feel a lot of hurt because there is a clear expectation, which is very reasonable. However, there are certain expectations, again, that I have heard of recent times that are so absurd. I'll use the institution of marriage as another example. I've heard where married people will say, my wife is not allowed to have male friends, for example, or my husband is not allowed to have female friends. I get the ideology of why one would say that, but then these expectations are founded, the value that is the base of this expectation is fear and insecurity. If you marry someone and you believe the person is faithful and trustworthy and you trust the person and you truly love the person, their friends become your friends, regardless of the gender. People don't have to walk in eggshell and say, oh, I'm not allowed to do this because, you know, people will look at it wrong. But the question is, what are your intentions and what are your values? So that particular expectation of couples, again, I'm just sharing here, but those particular expectations on couples make it seem like such a burden because, and those expectations are clearly founded on insecurities and fear, which are negative values. However, when your expectations are founded on positive values that strengthen your relationship, of course, they are justifiable. In all these expectations, the truth that we're trying to attain is that we're not trying to make people do what they don't want to do, but we're allowing people do what they truly want to do. First, I want to use an example of a Filipino Olympian gymnast in the recent Olympics who won a gold medal. And it was on the news that his mom withdrew all of his money without his permission. And he went on a rampage and he was so upset. Now, the comment sections were torn. A lot of people were saying, well, yes, after all she has done for him, she deserves it. And a lot of people were saying that just because you brought someone into the world does not mean that you're entitled to everything that they are, which is the point. How would his mother have felt if he, on his own free will, and said, Mom, for everything that you've done for me, this is the first outing I've had, and this is the first money I've made, I want to give it to you. How much joy would that have brought for both of them, as opposed to her just taking the money and saying it's an entitlement, and now she has caused, some form of disarray in her relationship with her son, which that money would never buy back. And again, does that not also invalidate all the sacrifices she has made? This is something we should think about. Love exercised through free will is the ability to give people the freedom to make their own choices, and in return, the ability to consistently choose to love someone or something unconditionally. So we might ask, how do we give people the freedom to choose to love us organically? I like to take my examples from scriptures, and I've come to realize that scriptures, when studied in spirit and in truth, through meditation, through self-actualization, and just pure, naked self-evaluation, scriptures are the best self-help books. Scriptures open our minds into life and how best to live life. And so while I thought on this matter of free will and expressing love, or the ability to give free will as an expression of love, I was reminded of God and mankind, so the relationship between God and man. And this knowledge has been the greatest source or the greatest foundation of my relationship with God. I come from a very strong Christian background, but my relationship with God today is, regardless of that background, is based on a revelation of love expressed through the gift of free will. So when I think about love expressed through free will, I'm reminded of man's relationship with God. In the beginning, the first gift that we were given was the gift of free will. And so this just brings out my mind. And I think it should bring that to your mind too, that if God, who is the creator of the universe, the God who is law, who is love, who is the universe himself, who causes all things to happen that we can't explain and we're still trying to figure out, if he can give the gift of free will, then it shows the importance of free will in our relationships. God could have easily made man to be a one-track minded being. Do as you're told, behave a certain way, live a certain way, worship me, bow before me, and whatever. And if you hear me saying this, you can also hear the narcissism in it, right? Forcing somebody, cajoling somebody to be a certain or a specific way. However, as Christians, we know of the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So while I was trying to find my fate, this was a big question for me. And I wondered, why did God put that tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Why was it in the Garden of Eden if we're not supposed to eat it, right? If that tree was there would be no need for free will. Would have just been doing as we're told. But in that tree being there was an opportunity for choice. What is free will? Free will is the ability to choose off of your own accord. You hear from here, you hear from here, you make your choice. And so that tree was there. And again, God does not do things and set trap and expect you to know. While that tree was there, the instruction was specific. He said, eat of all of these trees, but of this tree of knowledge of good and of evil, do not eat of it. Because if you eat of it, you will surely die. So he has told you the implications. He has told you the expectations. I expect you not to eat of it because I know you do not want to die. However, he allowed us to choose. Unfortunately, man, our dearly beloved Adam and Eve, they chose to eat of it. And so this is the foundation of all of humanity's conflicts. And is also the foundation of all the choices that we've had to make after that. The first choice of the first gift of free will would have stopped there. We chose not to eat and would have just been living in this state of Eden. We would have just lived in this state of euphoria because we chose to live in that state. And we could have a seamless relationship with God because we chose to obey. Right? However, we chose to know. And with knowledge comes more responsibility, which is also free will. So the choice of not being in that conflict was free will indicating power. We had the power at that point to choose, do we stay in a constant relationship with God or do we now know? Now we know. We know of good and we know of evil because we have chosen to eat of the tree. And so yes, mankind lived in death, in sin. Sin is death. And we're constantly conflicted of which way to go, good or evil. That is death. There's trauma, there's stress. You can imagine the wars that have started because of the mindset of mankind, giving access to the enemy to be able to influence us constantly, having that knowledge, having that access to the true thoughts. And so that is death. And a lot of people live in misery because of the back and forth, the to and fro and the battlefield that goes on in the mind. However, in this free will, God has also called us to constantly choose good. Again, in scriptures, he says, and I quote, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God. So now we have good and evil. We have blessings and curses. We have life and death. He still tells us, my expectation is that you choose life. My expectation is that you choose good. And we have the free will, the freedom to choose. And even God knows that for human beings, it's such a difficult choice to make to always choose good. And so, as a Christian that I am, and I am a Christian because I'm a believer of love, and the lifestyle of Christ, or the example of Christ, is a complete example of love. As a Christian, I believe that God came himself to make the ultimate sacrifice, to die the death, so that we can have eternal life. And so even in our choosing, even in choosing to just love him unconditionally, he has made another sacrifice. And he's still not forcing it down the throat of all mankind. He still says to choose to accept that sacrifice. He's still giving you the free will to choose to accept that sacrifice. I've made the sacrifice. It's there for you for free. But I beg you, choose it, that you may have life, and you may have life in abundance. And so if the ultimate creator can give us the choice to choose, who are we not to extend that same relationship to another person? And there's always wisdom in all God does. Because God does not expect us to be in a relationship with him because he's made us. God does not expect us to be in a relationship with him because of all he can do for us or what he can do for us. But he expects us to be in a relationship because of our knowledge of him. I was speaking to my able videographer, cinematographer today, and we're talking about coming into a relationship with God. This is what he expects from us, not just the robotic things that you're told to do, and a lot of Christians fall victim of, oh, I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that. God does not count your righteousness, would never be worthy enough. He's calling you into a relationship. Come as you are, and then choose to love me, not for eye service, not because of what I can give you, but because of your knowledge of me, because you desire to continue to know me, because you choose to want to be in a relationship with me. And this is the hand we should extend in all our relationships. We should learn from the greatest lover of all, God himself, who is love, that we should extend this ability to allow people to freely choose to love us and to freely choose to express their love for us. Because there's greater joy when someone chooses to do something for them by themselves than when you force them to do it. And so, for a moment of reflection, I want us to critically look inwards and let us evaluate how we treat the people that we love. Are we loving them unconditionally? Are we hiding our expectations of them and trying to manipulate them, guilt trip them, or gaslight them into doing things we want? Or are we loving them unconditionally and hoping that they continue to choose us in love, honestly and truthfully? Are we giving people the freedom and the ability to be their authentic selves around us? And are we doing the same too for them? It is very important that we allow people's true conscience be their true motivation. It is very important to know that those you have in your corner are there because they want to be in your corner. Not only because of what you can do for them, but because of who they are, who you are, and who you are together as a unit. Remember, God does not call us to be in a relationship with him because of all that he can do for us. He has called us to be in a relationship with him because we choose to be in a relationship with him. And also remember, you cannot give what you do not have. I can say this because of who first loved me. And I encourage you to get to know love himself. And he is the greatest teacher of love. Thank you for walking this journey with me. All my love, ASJ.